Let's hit it. Welcome, first-time listeners and returners to the Sports Deli, where everyone deserves a seat at the table. Hello, everyone. We're so honored to welcome Dr. Richard Lapchick. Dr. Lapchick is a human rights activist whose life was sparked in Germany at the age of 14 while touring a Nazi intermittent camp. In the 1960 Summer Olympics, he discovered the impact of sport and how it intersected between all lines, color, creed, religion, and his dream was to use sport as a vehicle for social change. His father, Joe Lapchick, was the coach of the New York Knicks and signed the first ever African American, Nat Sweetwater Clifton, in the history of the NBA. His earliest memory was as a 5-year-old seeing an image of his father swinging from a tree across the street from his house where people were picketing against the inclusion of a black athlete on a white team. In the 70s, he started fighting apartheid and led a boycott of the South African participation in international sporting events. Founded the study of sport in society at Northeastern University in 1984 and is now Director Emeritus. In 1993, co-founded Mentors in Violence Prevention Program, and 1 year after its inception, he wanted to take its mission national and establish the National Consortium for Academics and Sports. He was an associate professor of political science at Virginia Wesleyan College in the 70s, and he served as a director of Northeastern's University Center for the Study of Sport in Society for 17 years. He accepted the endowed chair for the DeVos Sport Business Management Program at the University of Central Florida Colleges of Business Administration in 2001. And in 2009, it was named the #1 Masters in Business Administration program in the nation for volunteer service. He's written a number of books, and he has collaborated with a number of incredible people like Jesse Jackson, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, David Stern, and Adam Silver. He writes the report for major sports organizations for diversity and inclusion, and you can Google that online and find those reports readily available at your fingertips. And he was voted one of the top 100 most influential people in the history of sports. We're so honored to have Dr. Lapchick with us today. We hope you enjoy the show. So grab your favorite deli sandwich or bagel and your favorite beverage, and let's do this together in the Sports Deli. Dr. Lapchick.
Good morning. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. I'm good.
How's Florida? Is it hot there already this morning?
It always is. You can predict from May to October.
You're a braver man than me. Really appreciate you making time to do this. Instead of being on ESPN or instead of going to the ESPYs or instead, you are undeniably one of the top voices in a really crucial time where sport and racial equality overlap. You must be incredibly excited, having probably waited for to use Gladwell, a tipping point like this. But we really appreciate you being with us, and we want to make that really clear.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Happy to help.
I've been passionate about sports, and being from Oak Park, Michigan, I had a lot of experiences going from a Jewish day school to the public school system, and I didn't realize it at the time, but it changed my life forever. And I know that you have been through some unbelievable experiences, and you've shared those things with the world over the years. But I want to sort of get into the formalities maybe a little later when I edit things. So I just wanted to ask you, maybe between now and even a few weeks ago, how have you changed any of your views, or what are you most proud of in terms of what the professional sports leagues are doing? just in terms of their approach to return to play, or what the WNBA is doing in terms of, their messages with regards to social injustice, as well as the NBA?
Well, as somebody who's part of the sports world, I'm particularly proud of the way many aspects of sport have handled both the pandemic as well as the racial reckoning. I think that we were bumbling along with the early days of the pandemic until an NBA player tested positively, and then Adam Silver literally shut the league down that day, and everything else followed in the country. There was not much being shut down in and outside of sports, but they took the lead. Adam took the lead. I think that, sports showed the way in other ways. The next day, Zion Williamson announced that he was going to donate the money to cover the salaries of all the people who worked at the facility where the Pelicans played, and literally $100 million was accumulated for employees of other teams, as well as for anti-coronavirus efforts in the country by professional athletes. I think the public saw the vacuum and realized how much they loved sports even more. One of the things that has made me really most proud recently is as a result of the kind of leadership that sports, particularly the NBA and WNBA, but really everybody has taken in the racial reckoning with the way we resume sports. Is there was a Nielsen poll of sports fans and their attitudes on race that came out about a week ago. And it showed that sports fans, who I've considered to be generally either apolitical or not very progressive most of my life, over 75% in all the questions asked about race and racism and the behavior of athletes and teams supported what they were doing in terms of race, financially contributed to Black Lives Matter, protested with Black Lives Matter. It was an astonishing turnaround and sign of hope that sports really has had an impact by the way they're conducting themselves, especially the NBA and WNBA.
So, yeah. Dr. Lapchick, you might be the hardest person that I've ever prepped for to interview. And there have been many, Coach Knight, Larry King, but I went over a lot of your background, and there's a whole lot to unpack. So I don't expect to get to all of it. And what we're hoping to do is, try to actively listen to the things that you share with us and take the things that are presented in your responses. And I don't know how great we are at that, but we're going to give it a shot. So I know I went to IU, and so I was in Bloomington in those intro courses for people who want to go into sport, where we are now including in your program ethics and diversity. There is always an introduction about the benefits of sport in society. That's like the first page in the textbook. Would you share with us your view on the role you think sports plays, why it's a plus, why we need it?
You mean that in terms of impacting society and changing society, or?
Yeah, impacting the what it lends, why it shouldn't be cut from high school programs, why we need to sing its praises and preserve it and hold it carefully.
Well, sport, you can start from the youth sport level, and everybody knows, because it's written everywhere, that there are health benefits from it, there are mental health benefits from it. We argue that young people learn about teamwork, they learn how to cooperate, they learn how to lead. In terms of girls and women, a huge percentage of successful women in a study showed that they were athletes growing up, and attribute that training that they got as an athlete and preparation for rising up through the corporate hierarchy. I think we're talking about more than 80% of senior women in corporate America were responding that way in this survey. But for me, those are all good, but I look at sport as a way to change society, to have a positive influence on society. That's my corner of the world in sports, is to use it as a platform to address various social justice issues. We have programs in our office on men's violence against women, on human trafficking, on diversity and inclusion, on leadership. Back a while ago, we had drug and alcohol aspects to them when those were more discussed in the 80s and early 90s. I believe that using athletes and having them prepared to talk about issues intelligently is going to get people's attention more than if you or I were talking about it. I think athlete activism today, which is unprecedented, it's something I worked most of my life to make happen unsuccessfully. But all of a sudden in the last 4 or 5 years, it's changed dramatically. And I don't think it'll ever go back. I think sports is now a positive weapon to affect social change in ways that never has been before. And we're seeing that right now during the racial reckoning. But 5 years ago, we wouldn't have seen that. I think the death of Muhammad Ali had an enormous impact on athletes who were standing back and not getting engaged. And
this would be 2016, right? This is around 2016.
Yeah. So young athletes saw 125,000 people pour into the streets of Louisville, showing their love and affection for this man. And more importantly, they saw at the same time newspaper stories and broadcasts about the extent of his life and what he had done for 50 years, not just that he stood up against the Vietnam War. They learned about him being consistently fighting for social justice and becoming I would argue, the most popular person in America by the time he passed away. And athletes thought, wow, if this guy's the most popular person in America and he did all this, maybe I can too. Shortly after that, the 4 NBA superstars go on the ESPYs and talk about police brutality and racism, and they get adulation from the public. And young athletes again saw that. The Pope had a summit on sport and service to humanity, adding his voice to global leaders who were talking about the positive value of sport, joining people like Mandela and Martin Luther King in his day as important voices for using athletes as powerful tools. And then it was then that Colin Kaepernick took the knee. Colin didn't come out of the blue and come onto a stage that hadn't been prepared for him. It had been prepared. That's not to diminish the importance or the courage that it took him to do what he did, because I told my wife that day that this will be his last season he'll ever play, but that someday he'll be regarded like Tommy Smith and John Carlos and Muhammad Ali. And I think that's exactly what's going to happen. There was
something that really last night when I was thinking about that, I wondered if there might be a reflection you had on, how history will remember Colin and what that will look like, decades down the road. And do you think that can be, you can say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think Colin Kaepernick, nobody's going to remember his career as a football player in terms of specifics, but everybody's going to remember the knee. Everybody's going to remember that on the opening night of the NBA and WNBA season, literally every player knelt when even the NBA players didn't kneel as active as they were in previous years. Colin has had a dramatic impact on this society that I don't think we have a full measure of yet, but I think in the years ahead, we're going to have that measure, and people are going to talk about Colin Kaepernick when they talk about Tommy Smith and John Carlos and Arthur Ashe and Muhammad Ali.
Now you mentioned Dr. Lapchick. Now to cover your credentials would take an hour. Between the numerous books you've authored, the honorary degrees, your own education, the programming that you're doing at UCF, the intertwined nature with the DeVos family and there in Florida, and how that program is enmeshed in what's going on at UCF in terms of sport management and diversity training. The report card, we don't have enough time for that. So I'm going to encourage anybody who's listening who has any doubt about the veracity of the information that you provide us to go and read your bio. You mentioned Mandela, you mentioned Kaepernick, you mentioned the 4 athletes at the ESPYs. You mentioned Muhammad Ali. You've had a very diverse life experience in terms of sport, and yet taking social justice into a corner of the world, which I'm just going to label as sport, could not have been easy in the beginning, probably hasn't been easy over the decades. Just now, maybe after decades of work that you have just told us that wasn't getting enough traction, you must be exhaling a little bit. There must be a little weight lifted. There must be a little light you see at the end of the tunnel.
Well, in some ways, the weight has been added. I mean, I am literally working 12 hours a day, 7 days a week since the murders. But I think it's for good reasons. It's for the reasons you just said, that the people want to draw on people who have been involved, and there aren't that many who've been involved as long as I have, especially, to come about to advise them on what they can do in their own athletic departments with their athletes, with their sports programs, what they can do with their professional franchises. People are willing to do things today that it would have been very difficult for me to imagine the success of it happening 3 months ago. So it was announced 2 nights ago that the West Coast Conference is going to use us to do a racial and gender report card, the first conference-wide racial and gender report card in the country. And equally important, they announced that they're implementing what they're calling the Russell Rule, named after Bill Russell, that will require diverse pools of candidates for all the top positions and head coaches in their athletic departments of those schools in the West Coast Conference. I've been fighting for that in the college level since 2007, calling it the Eddie Robinson Rule, naming it after the great Grambling
coach,
state coach. But I went with Johnny Cochran and Cyrus Mehri to the NFL in 2001 to threaten legal action if they didn't change their hiring practices, and the Rooney Rule was adopted shortly after that. So I've been an advocate of diverse pools of candidates for all senior positions, not just head coaching positions, but the decision-making positions for 20 years now, and we're starting to see that happen. And I can tell you that I'm having discussions with other conferences about racial and gender report cards, as well as the possibility of having a mandatory diverse pool of candidates adopted conference-wide.
It'll change outcomes. Will it change the bone marrow of the issue?
It'll change who's making the decisions. It was no accident from my point of view that the West Coast Conference did this, having the only woman of color as a conference commissioner. Everybody else, understandably, is trying to figure out what's going to happen this fall with the pandemic and with their athletic programs. But Gloria took the time to make this incredibly important initiative in her conference, and I think it had something to do with her being a woman of color.
Now, from a background standpoint, you've spoken about your father. You've spoken about his efforts to integrate, if you will, the NBA in early years, maybe circa 1950. You were 5 or 6 years old, I think, at the time, and you were exposed probably to things on the racial spectrum maybe a 5-year-old really shouldn't be exposed to, but it's not uncommon. Do you feel like you've picked up the baton a little bit?
Well, my father had a tremendous influence on what I ended up doing. The incident you're talking about is when I was 5, I looked outside my bedroom window in Yonkers, New York, where I was raised, and saw his image swinging from a tree with people under the tree picketing. And for years after that, I'd pick up the extension phone in our house, my dad not knowing I was listening, and it was racial epithet after racial epithet being hurled at him. And I didn't know what they were, but I knew that a lot of people hated this man who was my best friend. And I would later, as I grew old enough to understand it, realize that it was the coach of the New York Knicks. He had signed the first African-American player in the history of the NBA, Nat Sweetwater Clifton. I would later learn that he tried to get the New York Rens into the NBA in 1947, that his team that he played on in the 1920s, the original Celtics, became the first white team to play against black teams, developing a rivalry with the Rens, where he learned and saw firsthand the effects of racism that most white people didn't have a chance to experience or see. I mean, the Celtics would go to whatever the best hotel in town and spend the night there, and then they'd watch his friends board a luxury bus that Bobby Douglas had bought because he knew his players wouldn't be accommodated in those hotels. Celtics could go into whatever restaurant they wanted to and have a meal. He would watch his friends bring food onto the bus because they weren't going to be served in those restaurants. 3 times they left town in tandem, the Celtics in their Stutz Bearcats car, following the Rens in their bus. And they pulled into a gas station to watch the owner of the gas station come out with a rifle because he wasn't about to serve gas from his lily white pumps to this group of African-American players. In 5 games that they played against each other, there were actually race riots that took place during the games. Angry white fans stormed the courts. These were not in southern cities, although they played a lot in the South. They were mostly in the Midwest, including Michigan. And the basketball became known as the net game. I think a lot of people think that it got called that because of the net under the rim. It got called that because owners in arenas where there was violence was threatened would build a net around the court so that fans couldn't get to the players. Excuse me. The Celtics and the Reds would come out with knives packed in their socks to defend themselves because they were pretty defenseless with an angry mob coming toward them. And my dad and his opposing center, a guy named Tarzan Cooper, who both inducted into the Basketball Hall of Fame, would come out before the game and they wouldn't shake hands like is the tradition today. They would literally hug each other and sometimes kiss each other because they wanted fans in those stands to see that for the Celtics and the Reds, this wasn't about just a Hall of Fame basketball game, although both teams were inducted as teams into the Basketball Hall of Fame because they were so dominant. It was about what their vision was that America could someday become. So my dad had a tremendous influence on me as I learned those things, as I experienced the things I told you earlier. And I was, blessed that I was raised by this guy.
Dr. Lapchick, do you I know it sounds repetitious perhaps, but do you feel a strong connection to his work? Do you acknowledge the lineage? Do you feel like, it's a continuation? I mean, your work obviously is far more comprehensive in the racial and diversity field than maybe the germination of your father's work with the league. Aside from the influence, do you feel connected to that work?
Yeah, no, I think there's a direct line to how I was raised. I think there was a direct line to my basketball career, which was short-lived in some ways. But everybody told me I was going to play in the NBA because he was a great player. He was the dominant center of his day. He was the first great big man. I was 6 feet tall in the 8th grade and was one of the taller players in New York City and was heavily recruited. And I was recruited by a school called Power Memorial, which was the top basketball program in the country at the time. I didn't go there, but I became friends with the coach. His name was Jack Donahue, and he invited me to his basketball camp in 1961. 1961, there weren't basketball camps. Even college coaches didn't have them, let alone high school coaches. But this guy started a camp. He brought 5 of his white players and a black player to the camp. And one of the white players was hurling the N-word at the black player for the first 3 days of the camp till I finally challenged him. The guy literally knocked me out cold. Well, the black guy's name at the time was Lew Alcindor, became Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And a lifelong friendship began that it was so profound that when Kareem had his statue unveiled at the Staples Center, he asked me to speak at it. I was one of his 2 guests with Henry Louis Gates at the White House when he got the Presidential Medal of Freedom from Barack Obama. He flew to Orlando when I was scheduled to have surgery a number of years ago. So it's lasted literally 60 plus years since it was initially started that day in that camp. But the importance of that friendship as a 15-year-old white kid was I suddenly had a young urban African-American lens to see what racism was doing in his community. And I decided based on that I was going to spend the rest of my life working in the area of civil rights. And that's in effect what I did. I went and got a PhD in international race relations, which was the first PhD in the country in international race relations. This is the late 1960s. And I did my doctoral dissertation on how South Africa used sport as part of its foreign policy and the international response, and compared it to how the Nazis had done that in the 1930s. Started teaching at a college in Virginia. Eventually, the dissertation got published as a book in the early 1970s. I started to be asked to speak about apartheid, founded the sports boycott of South Africa in the mid-1970s. We didn't have sports contacts with the South Africa didn't have them with the United States, but as the European countries began to isolate South Africa and would no longer compete, suddenly in 1978, a South African Davis Cup team was going to play in the Davis Cup in the North American zone in Nashville, Tennessee. And my role as the leader of the coalition of groups that we had built to fight against apartheid was to get down there and try to get the matches stopped. I worked closely with the African governments. They asked me to announce they would boycott the Los Angeles Olympic Games in 1984 if this team was allowed to come. So before my last speech in Nashville that weekend to the student body at Vanderbilt. We held a press conference, and all three networks were there because we leaked to the press what the content was going to be, and it was so potentially impactful on the Olympics that they were all there. And Dick Schaap, who was covering for NBC Nightly News at the time, came up to me and he said the financial backers of the Davis Cup had pulled out. It looked like the matches were going to be canceled. I announced that to the crowd. It was an anti-apartheid crowd. They went crazy. And when I flew home that night to Virginia, I felt maybe for the first time in my life I'd done something worthwhile. Next day, I was working late in my college office. I was in the school library, which closed at 10:30. At 10:45, there was a knock on the door, and I assumed it was the campus security. So I didn't hesitate to open the door. And when I opened the door, instead it was two men wearing stocking masks who proceeded to cause liver damage, kidney damage, a hernia, concussion, and carved the N-word in my stomach with a pair of office scissors. So that night, lying in the hospital bed, I realized that if people had gone to the length they did to try to stop my father 28 years before, and to the length they had gone that night to try to stop me, that they must have thought that our using the sport platform to address various social justice issues, particularly racism, was having an impact in a way they didn't want to have go ahead in the future. So I decided that night that I was going to spend the rest of my life and career using the sports platform to address racism and other social justice issues, and that's what I've done.
Go ahead, Mike.
I heard you talk about your relationship with David Stern, and I'm interested, with all the things going on now. You mentioned that he read your autobiography, and then there was a relationship that started not long thereafter. And my question is, do you think that the NBA was largely due to your relationship with him and how he saw things more globally, at the tail end of his career, and how the sport grew so much that maybe it didn't initially when he took office?
I think David had a global vision right from the start. When he took over in 1983, which I think was his first year as commissioner, the NBA was being called too black. People were talking about how cocaine was so widely used in the NBA. And David Stern first obviously worked on reducing and eliminating the drug problem, but also his perspective was, we're just going to put the best players on the court, no matter what the color of their skin, but we're also going to hire the best people in our front offices. The NBA didn't need a Rooney Rule because they were so far advanced because of what David Stern was doing from the beginning. And what my relation with David changed when you're right, when he read my autobiography and he realized why I did the things that I did, he then gave me a call and said, I'd like to do some things with you. And that's really when it started. And the first thing that we did actively was I was asked by the emerging government in South Africa, the about to be Mandela government, to bring a program that we had started in America called Project Teamwork, which was being called America's most successful violence prevention program, to bring it to South Africa. And I went to David and later Charlie Grantham, the head of the Players Association, and I said, would you help us? And on this trip were David, Patrick Ewing, Alonzo Mourning, Dikembe Mutombo. The coaches were Wes Unseld and Lenny Wilkins. And there was violence going on in South Africa. David took a risk and took my word that they would be protected. And obviously the NBA set up a great security system, which they do anyway, for its players. And we were safe and protected. But still, to convince players to go, and I don't think it was any accident that there were three of John Thompson's players, because John Thompson, educated his players about social justice issues in addition to teaching them or coaching them to be successful basketball players. And that was the beginning of what became Basketball Without Borders, which is one of the NBA's biggest programs. Now they finally launched it in the year 2000, and now they go to South Africa mainly every year, but somewhere in Africa, and then they have it in Asia, they have it in Eastern Europe, and they're developing players from those areas as well as having an impact on those areas. And you look at the NBA now, and it's the percentage of international players on the NBA is quite extraordinary.
Yeah, what are your thoughts when you see something like Marlene Stallings at Texas Tech, or anything else that happens with regards to programs, not really conducting things and creating a culture that is in alignment with higher education. Are you proud of something like this, even though it's a sad day that they took such swift action? What are the things that, you share with athletic departments, with your reports that can help them move in a better direction, in terms of diversity and inclusion, so that we don't, go backwards ever again?
Well, first of all, they're more receptive today than they have been before because of the racial reckoning. I'm literally on the phone advising athletic directors and conference commissioners every day, pretty much, for the last 3 months. While we were here, I just saw my phone light up with a conference commissioner who was calling me, and it's not unusual that that's happening. They're asking for advice, what they can do, and they really want to bring about social change and have an impact on their players. We've used the word unprecedented to describe the current moment between the pandemic and the racial reckoning, and it really is that. But I think that, one of the things that we see is that all of the conference commissioners now, where they play football, are trying to decide, is there going to be a football season? Do we have spring football? Do we have any football? They're facing hundreds of millions of dollars that have been lost. And they're trying to juggle that. But I think in the midst of that, the conference commissioners who are people of color, such as Gloria Navarez at the West Coast Conference, also are thinking about the racial issues at the same time. And I think it's because they have that diverse perspective. When I look back at Adam Silver becoming the commissioner in the NBA following David Stern, arguably the most dynamic and dominant commissioner in the history of professional sports. And Adam was somebody obviously who was new. And on a Friday night, the Donald Sterling tape leaks, and Saturday morning it's a major news story. And Adam was able to go to a diverse group of people in the NBA front office, where there were lots of African Americans, where there were lots of women, and get advice as to what to do. And when he got out Tuesday morning on that podium and said, "We have no room for a racist owner in the NBA, Donald Sterling will not be an owner in the future." No commissioner had ever even taken any action against an owner, let alone throwing him out of the league. And that's the value of having diversity in the office, is to get those diverse perspectives, to listen to them, and to understand that, maybe there's a different way of looking at this than I might have looked at as a white guy.
He's a much different commissioner probably than his predecessor in terms of his approach and his viewpoint, and his peers. Probably, would you say he's unique?
Well, I think Adam is amazing. I think that, he's the one commissioner who, as a result of what he did with Donald Sterling, the players became close to him. I mean, they realized that this guy really doesn't want to tolerate racism. I mean, I think that objectively they probably knew that about David, but they knew throwing an owner out of the league was a bold stand. And, he was supportive of the players after Colin Kaepernick. He was supportive of the NBA and WNBA players becoming activists at the time. And obviously what's happened with the way the league's reopened in such a dramatic way, with tons of social justice messaging, both in the WNBA and the NBA, is unprecedented in professional sport. And I think Adam's leadership has had a lot to do with that.
I know for me, the only thing I've really cared about, not only as a player, but in my professional endeavors as a coach and life coach and basketball trainer, is to be a part of something bigger than myself. And, when I was reading things about you, and Gordon obviously had been a little bit more familiar with your background than I had. And all I'm doing right now, more than ever, is listening and learning. Not to be cliche, but I was overcome with emotion, reading a lot of the things that you've been involved with and how you've been a part of something bigger than yourself your whole life, as you've, talked about, as a result of, being the son of a father who was so influential and so ahead of his time, and you sort of, taken on that role now. And the baton has been handed to you. What are you most proud of? You mentioned, being a part of the Nelson Mandela, overthrowing their government. You've met Muhammad Ali, and now, this is in the forefront in terms of the Black Lives Matter. What are you most proud of?
I would have to say that the single event that I'm most proud of was that I was able to witness Nelson Mandela inaugurated as president of South Africa, in a country where, in a country that was the most racist government on the face of the earth for the whole of the 20th century, to have a man who had been a political prisoner for 27 years become its president, showed me that anything and everything is possible. We may see something as immovable, that it's never going to change. But if that could happen in South Africa with Nelson Mandela, then, what we're seeing in the racial reckoning right now can go on into the future and really systematically change what racism has been in this country. I think that, you talked about listening, and I think that's a key word right now. I think white people really are listening. In ways that they might not have before, might have been sympathetic, but didn't really understand. People said to me when I was attacked in 1978, well, now you understand what it's like to be Black. And I would respond, I don't understand what it's like to be Black. I can turn around and walk away from this movement tomorrow and go back to a comfortable middle-class white life and never face discrimination again. If I was Black and woke up the next day, I'd still be Black and face discrimination every day of my life. It might never happen, but it could happen on any given day. So I could never fully understand that. I think people are listening now to understand the daily experiences that Black people go through, as well as getting a grasp on what systematic racism does. The biggest, we're talking about South Africa, we're talking about America. The wealth gap in this country is for me, the umbrella that germinates all the rest of racism in this country. The wealth gap between white Americans and Black Americans today is greater than it was in South Africa between white South Africans and Black South Africans during the height of apartheid. The aggregate wealth of the 100 wealthiest people in the country on the Forbes list have an aggregate wealth greater than all 42 million African Americans combined. That's a big starting point to have to overcome.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Dr. Lapchick, you're alluding to, I've been curious, I'm always thinking like, why has it taken so long? I don't know if these are things that there must be some quiet time you have to yourself, even when you're as busy as you are now. And what are your thoughts in those times? Do you think, why has it taken so long? Do you think about the obstacles? I mean, there's still racism. There's still anti-Semitism. Some of those things, because of social media, are more maybe palpable than they were in decades past. What are you optimistic about?
So you asking me what I'm optimistic about, or why it's taken so long?
Well, I think both are valid, but let's start with what you're optimistic about and where you see the sun shining, other than in Florida.
Well, history would tell us that this isn't going to change, that the news cycle is going to go by and we'll go back and not pay attention. The reason I'm optimistic now, and it's a gut feeling, it's a gut feeling because I think that Generation Z and the millennials are much more socially conscious and much more committed to social justice as a generation. They have the technology. Gordon, when you and I were growing up and reading about civil rights, I saw Emmett Till's photograph in a still photograph in the newspaper, and it was horrific, but it was a still photograph. There was nobody there to capture how he died or what happened, but recently, 3 months ago, all of the world watched a Black American man have his life snuffed out by a white cop. There's no way to deny what happened. Young people have the technology with smartphones to capture those moments of history. The issue of police brutality has been going on for the history of America. And there were multiple incidents on an annual basis that the police simply had to say, this is what happened. I was defending myself, or whatever the reason is. And there was no way to prove that wasn't the case. Now we have it on video. Now you can't deny what you're seeing. and we have social media to transmit it and communicate more rapidly. As I said with Michael before, that I think white people are listening more. There are more white people out demonstrating in the streets as a percentage of the demonstrators than there ever have before. And I think the final thing that we have that's different that gives me a lot of optimism is that this whole thing about athlete activism as being, we have those masses of athletes now participating. And if you're an individual athlete and you've spent your life being asked, are you going to play on Saturday? Are you going to win the conference championship? You can overcome this injury. And suddenly you're being asked about structural racism and systematic racism. You're being valued as a multidimensional human being for the first time in your life, and it feels good. And they're not going to want to surrender that. They're being fully embraced as human beings as opposed to ball players. And that's a good feeling. So those are the elements that make me think that this is different and give me hope that real change can come about.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because when I was watching Race and Sports on the Golf Channel, I don't know if you saw that with Charles Barkley and Steph Curry and Ozzie Smith, I was watching very acutely their reactions, and they've done thousands of interviews as you have, but I watched Steph Curry, and it really felt like, and maybe I was reading too much into it, that he wanted to be remembered as part of his legacy, not just as the greatest shooter in the history of the NBA, but as someone who is involved in this movement, and that was more important to him than anything. And I think, to your point, that there's so many players now that want to be remembered for things like what Colin did in their own way, not just being a great athlete and being multidimensional.
I think that this is, emblematic of an example of what I was saying is it feels good. Steph is, I think he was unique anyway. I mean, he always had, even before athlete activism became as big as it is, he was talking about intellectual things and talking about ideas and figuring out how he and his family could make a difference using their resources to change things by donating them to certain organizations. But, he also has to see right now that he's beloved even more as a player because he's doing these other things than he was just as a player.
Is there a thing that things that you've walked away from the thousands of interviews you've done thinking, why didn't I get asked this? Why couldn't we have talked about that more? Are there pieces like that, or has it all been covered?
No, I think there have been pieces in other interviews where I thought that, but you guys have really asked deeper questions, and you obviously spent a lot of time preparing for this, and I appreciate that. And it was a pleasure to really be with you, and I'm grateful for the opportunity.
Well, we appreciate you being here, and I wish our paths had a greater intersection. And I look at your life, and it's very clear that you are squeezing all of the juice out of the rind, which I really appreciate, and I'm sure you do as well. And I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you're maintaining your energy and your strength. You must be an incredibly strong-willed man, and I admire that.
Well, I'm strong-willed, and I'm madly in love with a woman who supports what I do. So that makes it keep going pretty well.
Doesn't hurt. We thank you for being with us. Mike, do you want to close with something?
No, I just, it's been an honor. We've interviewed Steve Lavin and some Division I coaches, and this will be something that I'll remember for the rest of my life, and just want to continue to pay it forward like you. So thank you so much for your time, and much love and respect, and stay safe and mask up.
No doubt. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Gordon.
If you need anything out here on the West Coast, Dr. Lapchick, don't hesitate to shout.
All right. Take good care.
Okay.
All right.
You too.
Thanks so
Bye-bye
much.
now.
Take care. Bye-bye. I mean, he covered a lot, honestly.
Yeah.
You did a great job.
I was really trying to get him into someplace else.
I think he felt that, though.
Maybe.
I think he appreciated the thoughtfulness of the questions, but when you're working 7 days a week for, 12 hours a day, probably literally, you're 72, but you're rejuvenated over the last couple months. And so I think
listen, you and I both understand what it's like to work in an area that you're passionate. His area just happens to come with a much higher cost than our area. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know if I would get back up the next day after answering the door at 10:45 and being basically assaulted and go back at it.
Yeah. Right.
You know, he didn't say it in this interview, but maybe he did. He said it in the previous podcast. They carved the N-word on his chest with his office shears.
Right. Yeah. I think
I mean,
he mentioned it at the end. Yeah.
that's pretty, that's pretty harrowing.
Well, that was just part of what I'm sure he's taken with him from that experience.
Yeah.
Wait, let me ask you, if you had asked him about his racial report cards, what would you have asked him? And do you think that we're going in the right direction? And do you think this whole thing has helped that movement in terms of what he's doing?
Well, I always felt like the racial report card is talked about once a year.
You think it'll be talked about once a year now?
No, because I think it's got more traction. I mean, I think he mentioned it twice that what's happened with the WCC is really significant for him, and that work, and by him I don't mean him personally, I mean him professionally, and he acknowledges it. I think he sees that as they've moved off the starting line. Yeah, they've moved off the starting line. Something is now rolling.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because he's done so many things with the NFL, the NBA, and ESPN, and he has a passion for intercollegiate athletics and probably youth sports as well. But he really wants to, branch out before it's all said and done, so that people can take his lead and continue this movement. The Black Lives Matter is just part of it.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how to answer your question. Where I guess the question sounds like, where does the racial report card fit in the bigger picture? Yeah, I mean, it used to be a big part of his conversations, and it's probably not as much of a conversation right now, just because of because it's what's going on. It's achieved it. It's achieved its goal. I mean, I think its initial goal was to provide a metric for organizations that were interested in that kind of thing, whether they were going to publish it or whether they were going to use it as a catalyst for change. Well, he's been there all along. Right. Where have they been? Well, they've been doing a lot of other things, like making money. Making money and lots of other things. You're right. But I think I would never minimize that work. I think it's important, and I think you can go back and look at those things and the graduation rates, which I think are important. I mean, he mentions John Thompson, and he mentions him in a favorable light. His players don't. Right. I mean, there are guys that Mike Sweetney does not say nice things about John Thompson. Right. Yeah. Appreciate you. You were great. I didn't hear the Larry King interview, but. Oh my God! At the end, I did it at Goucher. I did it in Crash Hour. Wow! I came over from Towson. I did it at Crash Hour. In person? After he gave, right after he gave a lecture. I have the tape. And he afterwards, I said, "Mr. King, will you give me a couple of do a couple promos for me for the station?" And he said, "Yeah, sure. What's the station?" I said, "It's WCVT." And so I don't remember this verbatim, but it's like he did a thing like, "This is Larry King, and you're listening to Gordon Kaplan on WCVT. If you like Gordon Kaplan, listen to WCVT. If you don't like Gordon Kaplan, forever hold your peace." Oh, and we carted that up. In those days, you put it on a cassette, a cartridge, right. And then you just shoved it into the board, and you flipped it on, and you we'll be right back after this break. Look, you're listening to WCBT with Gordon Kaplan, this is Larry King, right? That kind of thing. So, that was a very interesting interview. Wow. Well, that's for another day. All right. We'll talk later. Have a good day at work. Yep. Good job, thanks, man. Yep. You too. All right. Bye. We hope that you enjoyed that incredible interview. Remember, Black Lives Matter.
Stop the Asian hate, stop the bullying, and please contact your local and state politicians for any group or individual that you feel is being marginalized. Also, wanted to remind all of you, if you're having a tough time, you can always call the Suicide Prevention Lifeline, and that number is 800-273-8255. That's 800-273-8255, and they are available 24/7, 365 days a year. You can also always check me out on Twitter, Instagram, and on TikTok at Mike Hootner. Thanks again to our amazing sponsors, Breaking Tea, Sport RX, PSK Collective, City Lokes, and Moolah Kicks, which you can see right here up on the screen. You can search them online at breakingtea.com, sportrx.com, pskcollective.com, moolahkicks.com, and citylokes.com. And if you'd like to support us at the Sports Deli, we'd love to have you either make a one-time donation or feel free to make a donation monthly, either 99 cents a month, $4.99 a month, or $9.99 a month. If you have questions about that, send me an email again to thesportsdeli@gmail.com, and I will send you the link on how you can do that. You can also find it at the bottom of every podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. There's a link at the bottom to support the show. And remember, you can always send us an email to thesportsdeli@gmail.com. Please check out our website at thesportsdelipodcast.com. Remember, it takes a village. And until next time, for Dr. J and Coach K, I'm Hootie Hoot. Much love. Peace.